Hello and welcome to this lecture on applied ergonomics, lecture 17. We were talking in the last lecture about the various aspects of worker motivation and how motivation can be sort of induced by changing various strategy or applying various strategies like job specialization, job enrichment, job enlargement, so on and so forth. Today we will be looking at a slightly different section, one about the social behavior of organizations. What are the reasons why there is a social behavior, or how you can influence that social behavior. We would also like to look at the aspects of individual behavior of human subjects associated with work systems. There can be a lot of formalism which is documented, which is by the rule books, and then a lot of informal behavior as well, which is not mentioned, but then is an essential part. So it basically induces these motivational effects, and so therefore this study needs to be very done in a very organized manner as to how human subjects would behave, or what is the social behavior of the organization as such. We'll probably try to look at some of these issues and then go into the domain of job evaluation, try to find out how jobs could be categorized as in different grades and different strategies to evaluate them, where you can use approaches typically in a well designed manner, so that you can actually rate them in terms of wages, etc., and create a wage structure as in. So looking at worker behavior, basically we all are aware that human subjects are very important from a work systems point of view, and therefore human subjects would have behavioral issues. A lot of it depends on the state of the mind at a certain instance of a particular person, particular human subject, and that also in correspondence to certain specific environmental stimuli which is given by the job at hand or task at hand. So or in a very well defined manner, we can state that the manner in which workers conduct themselves usually correspond to their response to environmental stimuli of various kinds. And basically there are two aspects of behavior. One is the formal behavior, where we are talking about formal rules and regulations, or well laid, well established behavioral patterns which are defined in the process of defining tasks or jobs in an organization. And then another completely unknown domain of informal behavior, which is actually the aspect related to the social side of the organization. Basically there is always a tag of war between this informalism and formalism in the behavior. Sometimes both can be utilized to the advantage of the overall success failures that an organization or a work system would have in place. And so one needs to understand what are those mix and matches or combinations of informal behaviorism and a formal behaviorism, so that an organization can accomplish its task. So let us look at formal behavior. So basically in definitions, this kind of behavior can be recorded as one in which members conduct themselves according to the set up standards that have been established in formal organizations. So there are rules, there are documentations, there are official policies, okay, there are sort of standard operating procedures which have to be utilized for all behavioral issues related to human workforce. If there is violation of any of them, it may result in some unpleasantness in terms of the administrative structure looking at you in a with a different site, etc. So apart from these well defined standards or official sort of operating protocols, there are also undocumented rules which are sometimes used, that are learned as accepted ways in which organization and its members carry out their business. For example, let's say if there is somebody who has an expertise in a certain repair activity or a task, basically guides one of his subordinates who is having a problem with executing a repair and is not able to understand the defect that has come in as a work schedule to that concerned person. So the idea here is that in an informal way, although in a formal rule based system one has to be accountable for his own job, there is some crosstalk between an experience sharing member and relatively inexperienced new member. So this is some kind of a informalism which is undocumented, which is not in the rule books, but can be utilized for efficient working within an organization. Let's look at informal behavior. So let's now look at some examples which talk about formal behavior of different human subjects. For example, a surgeon using a standard procedure to perform a surgery could be considered to be a formal behavior. A priest presenting a sermon at maybe a Sunday event could be again another example of having a formal behavior. Similarly, a salesperson explaining features of let's say a dishwasher to a customer, that's again something which is in the protocol, which is in the operating practice and well documented. So that's again a formal behavior. So production workers following standard methods to perform their task or work at hand, or production worker reporting up the chain of command about a quality problem. These are set practices. There are set recording means and information translation means which have to be followed in a routine manner, and so all these are examples of formal behavior. When we talk about the social elements which are involved in such formal behavior, so obviously there may be social elements in formal behavior that are important in achieving the work objectives which otherwise are not recorded or documented. Let's look at, for an instance, that let's say before the surgery a surgeon spends quite a bit of time with patient prior to the surgery, explaining the procedure and discussing the prognosis which is carried out, okay. Or maybe the priest, while just before giving sermon, induces some humorous ways and means to sort of seek attention, so that people pay attention to the sermon that he is going to deliver. So these are some instances. Or for example, a salesperson exchanging pleasantries with customers during initial encounter, saying asking about who the customer is, where it belongs to, where does he work, so those kind of things. So basically you can say such informal behavior on the part of the concerned human subject is more to set the stage for a documented procedure to be in place, or a documented ruled execution of some task in place. And so this set the stage kind of activities which are there, although informal and carried out in all different manner by different human subjects, okay, would definitely give a very important impetus to the work at hand and how it is carried forward. So these are social elements which gives a certain informalism, although they are not documented or recorded in a formal manner, but still it's very, very important, okay. So let's talk now about informal behavior. So just as formal behavior is all about what is in the rule book and what is standard operating procedure, informal behavior is basically that which is not prescribed by the policies or procedures and the rules of the formal organization. So something that has probably either in a work oriented manner or a purely social manner, just coming out because human beings by nature have their social behavioral pattern when they work together in groups or come together to execute a task, or even come together in a gathering. And so there are these aspects which cannot be recorded anywhere, because it varies widely between human subjects based on their perception of how they look at the whole system and the environment. So these are behavioral incidents which are not prescribed by the policies, procedures and rules that otherwise are there in formal organizations, and most of these has a social orientation, you can say. That's what you define, or how you define the informal behavior. So, let us look at some work oriented informal behavior among different stakeholders. For example, when we talk about professors temporarily taking over a course of another professor who is on a vacation or something, you can consider that to be an informal behavior. Maybe that the professor whom he is pitching for, maybe a different, maybe having an expertise in a completely different domain, but just because somebody has to pitch for somebody's absenteeism, it is a sort of an informal taking up of work and doing some activities with the students, which may be sort of related to the basic agenda of the course or the structure of the course. So, that can be an informal behavior. For example, again a production worker giving advice to another worker who is having difficulty in keeping up pace of the task is another sort of an informal behavior. Or a car salesperson completing a sale for another salesperson when the other has sneaked away because of the arrival of his spouse suddenly or something, or some family issue. It could also be categorized under the informal behavior. So, such informal behavior does exist, helping each other out, trying to make shift for one another during vacations or during absenteeism because of some otherwise socially relevant events which take place around human subjects is commonplace in organizations, and therefore, it has to be categorized as the broad category of informal behaviorism. So, there could be other examples of purely social informal behavior, just as I mentioned about work oriented informal behavior. For example, once in a while you may have seen a supervisor or a foreman talking to a subordinate about the sickness of one's mother or one family member or something, which kind of initiates a good cordial relationship between the authority to which a person reports and the person himself. So, such kind of informal chit chat sessions are almost always there in any organization, just because you want to take a person in confidence so that he can do his best, he can be motivated to sort of give a reasonably good level of productivity. So, similarly there can be other social informal behaviors where, let us say, office colleagues are chatting with each other on the lift or while during lunch breaks about some events which took place outside the domain of the work. For example, one can discuss, for example, the cricket game or the baseball game which happened. So, these are kind of informal chat sessions which otherwise are important for defocusing the attention from the task. Sometimes breaks or relaxation factor is important for execution of work in a timely manner. If person is always thinking and doing work, there may be an efficiency issue associated with his overall productivity level. So, such kind of socially relevant purely social informal behavioral patterns also exist among human subjects. It could also be for example, a salesman sharing a joke with another salesman while some routine operating procedures are on about selling something to a customer. So, that can also be a sort of an informal behavior. So, so therefore, now you have categorized informal behavior into one which is work oriented, which is related to task at hand, and another which is more from a social aspect. Obviously, there are certain rules in such social organizations to be followed, because when it comes to too much of informalism and a lot of you can say misbehavioral deliberations, it may result in unpleasantries, and that is not acceptable at any administrative level at any time. So, there has to be a stop to the way the informalism goes into you can say unethical or immoral kind of activities. And so, therefore, just as the formal organization has rules to regulate the behavior of its members, the social organization also has rules which are set up to ensure how much of informalism can be tolerated within the setup, the organizational setup. So, social rules are typically based on the culture, for example, of a place, or some routine customs which are there, maybe the ethnicity or morality, the age or gender, and maybe shared beliefs of the group that we are targeting while developing the or structuring the social organization. So, there can be formal rules and social rules sometimes would exist in a manner so they reinforce the formal rules. For example, look at this particular case of physical abuse of one employee by another. It is admonished in either of the systems. Neither the formal structure would take note of any such physical abuse, or nor the social organization would take note of such physical abuse. So there are rules on both social as well as formal which would reinforce each other in a manner in certain cases, you know, which allows the things or which disallows the things completely from either the social organization level or the, let us say, the formal organization level. However, there is also a case where these two would conflict with one another, and there may be in a way pressures built up because of conflicting formal rules with respect to the social rules. Let us look at, for example, a case where we talk about formal rules being introduced to increase or enhance productivity. So obviously, if we look at the socially defined nature of organizations, if such productivity increase does happen within organizations, there are always job cuts, and it basically gives a threat, you know, or among its stakeholders, or let us say the human subjects, about job security. So as such, in those kind of situations, the social rules may not go hand in hand with the formal rules, because there may be some conflicting interest between the social and the formal rules, and workers may resist methods or changes in methods, okay, work methods, which would associate themselves with productivity increase. Okay, so such is the spate of the you can say the reinforcement or conflicts between the formal and the social rules of an organization. We would like to look at a different aspect now, which is about job evaluation in organizational ergonomics, and obviously so far we have had a very good illustration of how human subjects are motivated, what is the kind of job satisfaction level, how you can classify the different or associate the different causes of job satisfaction or motivation, and then how you can actually look at human subjects working within an organization in terms of their behavioral patterns. But ultimately the goal of all such systems will have to have a tangible outcome, and the study in this organized manner of the human aspect of any work system automatically leads to a very important tangible output, which is the wage system design, which is basically related to who gets paid for what he does. And therefore, it is important that we need to be able to evaluate jobs in terms of let us say the nature of the work that is being delivered, nature of the work in terms of the mental effort, the physical effort, the skill sets, the various other factors which human beings would sort of provide to achieve a task or a job that is at hand. And evaluation is done these days, or probably even, you know, from quite some time, in a very fair and square organized manner. The purpose of this section of the lecture now would be dedicated to how do you evaluate different jobs. Okay, there are different methods, standard methods for doing such job definitions, so that you could ultimately align all the jobs or tasks which are being created within an organizational framework to wages or salary. So when we talk about job evaluation as such, the definition, obviously we will also be covering another area of performance appraisal depending on the amount of time available for this section. So let us now look at job evaluation first. And so if I really wanted to define what is job evaluation. So it is really a systematic method for assessing the relative values of different jobs which exist in an organization, and also for determining an appropriate wage or salary structure for those jobs. So basically it is about grading the jobs into highly paid or relatively lower paid jobs, and therefore an objective evaluation which should be away from the subject which is undertaking the job has to be done at a priori before even the work system starts getting into operation. Now there may be a possibility that there are always human factors associated which may change the way that a person thinks in terms of wages or salaries, but while planning for the job at the very beginning without associating any human factor, there is a basic salary structure which has to emerge. Now, if supposing somebody is well performing after the salary structure, which is a basic salary structure, has emerged, he can always have incentives in terms of his performance. So, that is how your basic strategy should be when we talk about job evaluation, and basically the evaluation is carried out on 3 different principles. One is that the job evaluation should typically determine the relative value that the job provides over each other. So, we should not really consider the absolute value. There is nothing called absolute value of a certain job. Okay. So, it is only the relative value, whether something is going to add more value or lesser value to the overall job structure, that is to be seen here. And obviously, the second principle on which such evaluation is carried out is normally that the procedure for evaluation should be concerning only with the job, not with the person, as I think mentioned before. And the pay level of a particular job is sort of determined, quote unquote, through this evaluation route. So, this is the single handed factor which is responsible for determining the wages or the salary structure at the very beginning of laying out the organizational design. So, why do we need really job evaluation? What are the different reasons for using job evaluations? So, obviously, there is a general desire of any organization to have this equitable wage structure, okay, among all its stakeholders. So, it could basically mean that as far as possible distribute the job in a manner which is almost equal in terms of its contents, and pay everybody similar kind of a wage or salary. But somehow this factor does not happen, because the nature of jobs are quite varied. In some jobs more planning, more analysis is involved, and in some jobs there may be relatively lesser amount of planning or analysis and relatively more physical effort which may be involved. And so, obviously, there has to be an evolving wage structure which comes out. Okay. So, equitable wage structure does not mean that you pay everybody equal salaries, okay, but depending on the similar categories or grades of jobs which are there in an organization, by and large one should try that the remuneration which is there are more or less on a equitable norm. So, organizations of course would like to have such a wage structure so that it can defend claims of unfairness, favoritism, also gender or age, based on their wage structures. Obviously, if we looked in the current domain and see how the wage structure is planned, so the current wage structure obviously is not very consistent with the jobs actually performed, and that needs a re-evaluation or re-looking of the jobs at hand, and resetting of this salary or wage distribution system or wage structure associated with that job. Sometimes the organization's pay levels may not be very competitive, so that there is always a possibility of draining out of resources, human resources, from one organization to another. Maybe migration is done towards an organization which is more reasonable in terms of its pay structure. So, therefore, some evaluation, some prorating, some change in salary structures from time to time needs to be carried out to not lose the share of the human resources that a company would have in a business environment. Obviously, there is always a need to evolve the compensation system based on external influences like legal prerequisites, or even sometimes a decision of the administrative structure to be more competitive in the business. And so, therefore, there is always a need by organizations to change the compensation system and develop a more and more sound wage structure. Therefore, it is important that we always consider this task of job evaluation and accomplish that in a proper manner, so that we are able to give a good standing to the overall wage system or structure. So let us look at the various steps which are to be carried out in defining such job evaluations. So the first task that is in hand while evaluating jobs is known as job analysis. So the basic purpose here is to analyze each and every job and analysis of these jobs are carried out by setting or by sort of different job descriptions, I would say, for all the positions and levels which are there, operating levels which are there in an organization. So it's an organized way of looking at what is the content of the job and labeling each and every portion of task which contributes to do that job in a very organized manner. So the first step is this analysis. So you are defining down to the level of even a single action or a set of actions done by a certain job description, okay, or defined by a certain job description, and you are trying to get a database of all such descriptions together for defining the job structure. Then of course there is a relative worth which need to be computed for the variety of different jobs which have now been analyzed in the last step, and the relative evaluation of the jobs again are done in a very standard manner. There are certain organized methods again which are used in terms of maybe the basic human efforts that go towards the accomplishment of a task, and trying to rank them or rank these efforts in all these job processes, trying to even establish relative merit demerit between the different jobs of same type in the same department or same type in different departments or different, let us say, job specializations. And so there is always this relative comparison between two jobs at a time, which is better than what, which gives you the overall basis of the hierarchical job structure in terms of efforts, okay, or what is better and what is probably down the order. Once you have done this, then you have to establish, of course, a weight structure associated with the overall ranking of such job descriptions which have formulated among each and every job of an organization. And in order to look at these in little more specific terms, the job analysis can be defined as a process of obtaining and documenting all the relevant information about a specific job, such as, let us say, the total amount of tasks which are performed, the responsibilities which are assumed, the skills which are needed, the knowledge that is required. So you can typically write statements about each job, okay, where it would include job title, it will include duties and responsibilities associated with this title, you would require the qualifications. So there is some qualification requirement. This is pre-knowledge which needs to be routed in order to ensure that the human factor which is engaged with such a job delivers to the duties and responsibilities indicated in the job title, okay. And then there are work conditions which are also defined for a particular job title. Sometimes people who are doing hazardous duties would get compensated more. For example, look at the ground staff to the staff which operates flights. There are definitely differences in their compensation structures, because the ground staff is probably not risking their life more in comparison to those who are actually flying, and so there has to be some differentiation, some demarcation between the compensation structures of both these categories of people. So the work conditions do matter for defining or for describing the jobs. And then of course the relationship to other jobs also is very important. So once these work conditions are defined, so you need to sort of give a descriptive about how this job at hand relates to the other jobs associated or parallelly being executed in the same organization. So once this analysis process is taken care of, then we need to evaluate about which is better, which is lesser in terms of the different human factors which need to be put in order to accomplish the jobs. And so there are different methods again for doing evaluations. So there are some qualitative methods where the comparison would merely by examining each job in its entirety and trying to use experiential knowledge of administrative means to rank the jobs in terms of better jobs and lesser jobs, okay, or classify the jobs into different grades, something like that. And then there could be even quantitative methods where we analyze the component factors of each jobs in terms of certain human forte or human contributions, okay, and assign numerical scores and ranking, so that we could have a basis of a rank based evaluation of the jobs, okay, quantitative basis. There are other methods for job evaluation. For example, there is this factor comparison method and point factor method. I am going to come to all these different methods in relatively higher level of details in the following slides. So let us first look at the job ranking method, which is a qualitative method for comparing different jobs. So when we talk about the qualitative evaluation, we basically mean that you have to rank the jobs in increasing order, okay, in terms of value, and then organize into hierarchy and create grades into which you can classify these jobs. So basically you can create jobs with certain definite valuations in terms of a qualitative ranking and group them together and put them into different grades, and each grade could therefore serve as a pay band or a pay structure. So for organizations with multiple departments, the jobs within each department are first ranked, okay, and then comparisons are made between departments after that in such kind of paired comparisons. So basically a paired comparison leads to a technique which is more a ranking technique, in which all the jobs are compared almost two at a time to identify which of the pair has a greater value in terms of the overall deliverable listed in the organization. Let us look at an example. So let us say, for example, there are different machine shops and we want to compare based on different job descriptions of such a machine shop, which is a higher sought after job and which is a lower sought after job. And so you have to do again a paired comparison between first of all list all the jobs into different types. So in this case, for example, there could be several job types. One could be that of the machine operator, then a material handler, then tool and die maker, drill press operator, a milling operator, a lathe operator, and a setup operator. So these are the different kind of job classifications. Each of them has a job title, a description, a certain set of qualifications, which I have already given earlier. Now you do a paired comparison between, let's say, 1 and 2 and find out that 1 is better in most of the cases, okay. And similarly you do it for all. So for example, 1 and 2, 1 and 3, 1 and 4, similarly 2 and 3, again 1 and 5, and so on and so forth. You do the different combinations of the different jobs which are listed here and see for how many number of times in such combinations one is rated higher in comparison to the other. For example, you can have the machine operator rated exactly 4 times higher than the other, the material handler rated almost in no cases to be high, so they are always on the low side. Tool and die maker is more or less in 6 cases it has been reported higher than each other, and similarly drill press operator only in 1 case, milling operator in about 3 cases, a lathe operator in about 2 cases, and setup person about 5 cases. So this kind of gives you a basis for the ranking. So the one which is having the maximum number of times where it is rated highly becomes the highest quality job, okay, and similarly the one which has the lowest number of ratings or lowest number of times it has been rated higher is the lowest quality job, and then all the other jobs are ranked commensurately between these 2 ranks. So these are paired comparisons which are made for such a machine shop to create an overall job ranking strategy. So I think I will close down this particular lecture in the interest of time, and then in the next lecture we would talk about the various advantages and disadvantages of such paired comparisons, and then maybe look at some classification methods, etc. Thank you very much.